Hello folks, this is Soundwave here, and today we're going to be looking at the Junk Beam. The Junk Beam, in my opinion, has gotta be one of the more powerful heavy weapons, and one of the most funnest heavy weapons to use. In the simplicity of just a mere beam beaming down all the enemies and dealing massive amounts of damage is so satisfying. Other than my personal opinions, the Junk Beam is an overall pretty good weapon. But the only flaw that I can really see in this weapon is that it doesn't have as much as a quick burst of damage like the kunai nor the Sheriff's Carbine. And now you might be asking, Soundwave, why the hell you're not using Guardian for this build? Guardian has really great fire rate and is also great with weapons. While that is correct, Guardian is really great with weapons and has lots of fire rate, but on the other hand, Elementalist has a very specific build that can lead him to have infinite ammo. Realistically, I would probably say that Guardian would be way better with weapons than Elementalist, but this Elementalist build is a ton of fun, so I'm just going to be using this build. Although I will go ahead and warn you that my information may not be correct. And honestly, I do not really look at the numbers too much, and I really just go by of just how fast the enemy's health just drops. And to be honest, I really did kind of just turn off my brain during this run because all I did was just hold down left click. So I hope you enjoy this run. I almost went to Ruins for the extra levels, but I did remember that I have a buddy bot with me, and I really would like to get much more value out of my buddy bot, because if I were to get him to legendary rarity, he would give me a random 10% increased damage to a random element that he is on. Now, normally on any other character, it would not be worth it, but since we are on Elementalist, and like elemental damage is great for Elementalist, so I want to get all I can. And Engineer is also another character that would really benefit from Buddy Bot. Well, obviously because he does benefit from Summoners, but also because he's really great with elemental damage. But other than that, I am very happy that I got an affix on Burst Shot because of the Junk Beam's slow burst damage. The Burst Shot really makes up for it. Since the Junk Beam does also need to snowball a little bit and get more upgrades and elemental upgrades and items, but overall it's still a really good weapon. let me break down the build so far. So I will be starting off getting a perk called Infused Weapon. What that does is that basically it'll deal the same elemental damage that my mantra cycle is on. And there's a perk with that perk that basically makes it so that whenever the mantra cycles, it automatically reloads your weapon. And that is basically a half of the build done. And we enter Dynamic Mantra, which basically increases our elemental damage by 10% and makes our mantra go by faster 40%. But there's also another perk that basically makes it in total go by 60%. So the idea is that mantra will cycle and it'll keep reloading our weapon, causing us to be able to shoot infinitely without reloading. And the reason why I'm stopping by shooting a lot and not trying to reload is because I have Rubik's Cube right now. And Rubik's Cube re-rolls my affixes whenever I re-roll, and I want to keep my affixes. The whole reason why I got Rubik's Cube is because I would get a 10% increased damage in general, and I thought that without having to reload, I could just never have to re-roll my affixes. But I did kind of a goofy fuck up, because Infused Weapon already does reload your weapon and switches the affixes around. Another thing that I would like to touch on this build is that it is very important to not get a perk that is from Dynamic Mantra. What Chromatic Affinity does is that it basically increases one element in the Mantra cycle by a long time, but decreases the other ones a lot. And that will throw off the reloads way off. I got rid of my junk beam that had an affix on it, because I was not really paying attention that much, admittedly, and like I was just focused on the fact that the other one had much more locals on it. I did not do very well whatsoever in Doom Gardens, but the only thing I wanted was the Crystal Powder, so I can upgrade my weapon rarity to Legendary. I really wanted to get a Transformer toy because Transformer toy is just really fun, but coffee would be way more beneficial to this build and it would be way more funner to use with this build and just complement my build overall. So I ended up going with coffee. And with my junk beam with lots of levels and this rarity upgrade to legendary, we're going to be starting to shred.
You got a small dick. It's the size of this walnut, except way smaller. And guess what? Here's what my dong looks like. That's right, baby. All points, no quills, no pillows. Look at that. It looks like 2 balls in a bong. He fucked my wife, so guess what? I'm gonna fuck the earth. That's right. This is what you get. My super laser piss. Except I'm not gonna piss on the earth. I'm gonna go higher. I'm pissing on the moon!
I can pay.
From this point, when I got Bowtie and Cucumber, I just started to just melt everything. Like, all I did was just hold down left click. I took Toaster over Balloon because I could take advantage over the other effects that I have. But during this, I do kind of fat finger a lot since like I am just holding down left click, and I was not paying attention at all.
今がチャンスだ。我を使うのか。超合体技タイガーファング。
タイガーファングとは J デッカーとスーパービルドタイガーを接続し全エネルギーを一気に発射する超合体技である。
エネルギー充填 120%。 タイガーファング発射。
Then that is the end of this run and this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share. In my opinion, the Junk Beam is a pretty great heavy weapon. Very versatile once you put the proper resources into it. But the only drawback that I see with the Junk Beam, or any possible drawback, is the burst damage. But other than that, it does pretty consistent damage. But I will be seeing you, Brobots, in the next one.